To kick us off in this thinking are the folks from OpenResearch. Elizabeth Rhodes is the research director for the unconditional income study at OpenResearch. She completed a joint PhD in social work and political science at the University of Michigan. Give it up for her. Woo! Y'all already know that takes some time. That's an investment. Where her research focused on health and education provision in informal settlements, workforce development and poverty prevention and alleviation strategies. Elizabeth also holds an MSW from Michigan and a BA in government and economics from Georgetown. Whoop whoop! Karina Dodson is the research and insights manager at OpenResearch. She previously worked as a social science researcher at the University of Michigan for 7 years on a wide range of topics, ranging from poverty and crime to transportation and social policy. Most recently, she has worked on research developing an index to measure transportation insecurity and explore its prevalence, causes, and consequences. Karina holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Michigan. Welcome, y'all.
Hello. Hi. Amazing. Well, first off, thank you to everyone that's been involved with organizing and putting on this incredible conference. We are honored to have been asked to speak here today, and thank you to everyone else who has participated and who has presented. It's been incredible to hear all of the wonderful work that everyone's been doing. So we're excited to share with you today some details about who we are at OpenResearch, some background on our unconditional cash study, and then talk about some of our initial findings. So Beth, I'm sure everyone would love to hear how you got involved with this study and how it all started in the first place.
So back in 2016, it's been 8 years now, I was finishing up graduate school, and someone sent an email around the political science department with a call for researchers to study basic income, giving away unconditional cash. I was very intrigued. I had written a paper revisiting the idea of a negative income tax and what that might look like in the context of the existing social safety net. And so I responded to the call for researchers, and that's how I got involved. Back at the time, there were very few pilots happening in the US. The space has grown so much, the interest has grown enormously over this time. The idea was a little bit more fringe at that time, and we had to really work through a lot of logistics in terms of how do we actually give away the cash. I worked with a number of people here today, considering benefits protection. We ended up passing a law in Illinois with our nonprofit partners to ensure that people did not lose their existing benefits. Yeah. It's great. It took a long time to get off the ground. It's been 8 years, and results are just now coming out.
Yeah, it's definitely been a long time coming. So back when I was at grad school at Michigan, I remember hearing about this study because people at Michigan were really excited that one of our alums was selected as the research director to head this study. And then I kind of didn't hear anything else about it until I applied for this position.
And that was both by design and by necessity. Protecting participants' privacy was our #1 priority. There had been quite a bit of interest around this study, and particularly given the Silicon Valley connection, there was a lot of interest in participants. And it was our goal to protect their privacy and allow them to live their lives as normal while receiving this money. We also had a very small team. Started out with just 2, then maybe 3, eventually 4. So we didn't have the bandwidth to do anything except work with participants. And this is key to our approach to research. We view our participants are critical partners. The research and the ability to inform policy depend entirely on participants' willingness to share their experiences thoughtfully and to participate in the research. One of my favorite statistics overall is that in 2023, we sent 19,400 emails and text messages, and our average response time was 2 hours and 2 minutes, including nights and weekends. So prioritizing participants was key to our approach.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty incredible to think about, designing and implementing such a comprehensive study, starting with just 2 people. And that's one of the things that really stood out to me about this study, why I was first drawn to it, is it starts by asking this big open-ended question on this long time horizon. You know, it starts with this question of what happens when you give unconditional cash. What happens when you give people unconditional cash? Like, what are the potentials? What are the limitations? Can you talk us through more about how the study was designed to answer that question?
When we started, we sat down and tried to think about all the different ways people might use the cash, and then how that would lead to changes in outcomes across multiple dimensions. And so that was critical. We wanted to design a very comprehensive study. We focused on a long time horizon, 3 years, and a large cash transfer amount. So 1,000 participants received $1,000 for 3 years, while a 2,000-person control group received $50 a month for 3 years. We also, in addition to the scale and the amount of money and the length, we wanted to include a representative group of participants. So we focused on ages 21 to 40 at the time of enrollment, and we recruited from 2 different states, Illinois and Texas. But within those states, we selected 9 to 10 counties, including large urban, medium urban, suburban, and rural areas. We also collected multiple different types of data. So we had interviewer-enumerated surveys at enrollment, midline, and endline, for which we had roughly 96, 97, and 98% response rates for midline and endline. We sent out monthly short surveys just to check in, see how people were doing, collect more frequent measures, learn. We had a lot of movement, as we'll talk about later, so get updated information. We also had an app where we collected nutrition diaries, time diaries, and other activities. And then we had a qualitative subsample. We had 156 participants that were interviewed at length 1 to 2 times a year, so we could really understand their stories.
So our research was designed to produce a multidimensional understanding of how the cash affects people's lives. So to what Beth was speaking about, we employed a mixed methods research design where we simultaneously collected both quantitative data from a variety of sources with qualitative, semi-structured, open-ended interviews with this subset of participants. And this methodology was critical because we can establish statistically significant causal relationships using the quantitative data. But what we'll see and what we'll show as we get into our findings is there's a lot of variation, right? Like, people's lives are incredibly nuanced and complex. And the average effects often obscure like what's actually going on. And so the qualitative sample and the qualitative data allow us to get at the nuances behind people's experiences. There was a lot of variation across like multiple outcomes. Like, Beth, if you want to speak to some of the outcomes that we look at.
Sure, we have topic areas include employment, financial health and resilience, geographic mobility and housing, health, time use, political and social attitudes, well-being, children, crime, and more.
And this is just the beginning. So our goal was to provide comprehensive, high-quality data that's accessible to a broad audience. So we are motivated by providing impact-oriented research, so to be used to inform policy, advocacy, and future research. So the first 2 working papers on employment and health were released today, but in the coming months, we will be doing continued analysis on a variety of topics that Beth was just talking about. But we're going to get into talking about some specific findings that we released today, which was fortuitous timing with the conference. But at a high level, what we find is that the cash offers flexibility. It can be used to address people's specific needs based on their unique goals and circumstances. And we see this in the wide variation of impact across multiple outcomes. So we're going to highlight a couple of those outcomes for you today, starting with employment.
And employment is one that a lot of us here maybe are less interested in, but certainly captures the attention of economists. And what we found is that recipients have increased agency to make employment decisions that work based on their unique goals and circumstances. This study started during the pandemic, and so a large number, almost half of participants were unemployed at that time. And so over the course of the 3 years, we see employment rates and hours worked increase across both groups. But the increases are smaller among recipients of the $1,000. Recipients work on average about 2% are less likely to be employed and work about 1.3 hours less a week. So these are very modest changes.
And one of the benefits, again, of having this qualitative sample is that we can see what's going on behind just the numbers, right? And so what we see is the way the participants are talking about the unconditional cash transfers is as replacement or supplemental income. And so we saw in our qualitative participants, people were using this as an opportunity to reduce hours at work, either go from working 3 jobs to working 2 jobs, or working 2 jobs to working 1 job, or simply it provided them more flexibility to make those choices. And we see this in our effects on entrepreneurship. And so one of the interesting things that we see is that the cash had a significant effect on interest in entrepreneurship. And there was a notable increase in entrepreneurial activity for underrepresented groups. So across, on average, we see an 8% increase in reportedly having an idea for a business. But then specifically for our female and our Black recipients, we see an increase in the 3rd year of actually starting a business. And so we asked recipients like what some of the businesses that they started were, and some of those are listed on the screen behind us. But we see that the cash gave people more flexibility to think about, to begin expressing interest, and for some people, and under the right conditions, to actually take steps towards starting businesses. Beyond that, we see that primarily people spend the money, as is very well documented by existing studies, on meeting their basic needs. And so the money primarily was spent on increases to food and beverage, transportation, and rent. But one of the things that I found most interesting is that relative to the control group, we see the greatest increase on recipients spending the money on supporting others. And so this was on gifts or loans to friends and family, on donations to charity, but primarily this was made up of gifts and loans to friends and family. And we saw on average recipients increase their spending on others by 25% relative to the control group, which is really incredible, like when you think about it, that the impact of the cash could extend beyond simply the lives of the recipients who received it, that this could benefit their social networks and local communities as well.
But one of the big takeaways is that cash is an important piece of the puzzle, but it is only one piece of the puzzle. We see that with health, for example. Participants are actually more likely to have received dental care. We see increases in healthcare utilization, hospital care, emergency department care, but we don't see actual changes in physical health. $1,000 a month for 3 years isn't enough to undo a lifetime of inadequate access to care or overcome chronic health conditions, which many participants faced. We also see time trends. In the first year, we were very encouraged by very large increases in food security. People reported having much more adequate access to food. And we also saw reductions in stress and mental distress. but those improvements faded away by the second and third year of the program.
And that really speaks to the importance and the benefit of having such a long time horizon, is that we were able to see how the cash impacted people's lives differently throughout the years. Another area where we see how the impact really differs based on circumstances is with regard to moving. And so a lot of our participants moved, both in the recipient and in the control group. On average, recipients were more likely to move housing units, neighborhoods, and more likely to be able to report paying for housing. And when we look at these effects broken down by income level at time of enrollment, we see some really interesting differences. So the recipients that had come from the lowest income households at time of enrollment were actually the most likely to report being interested in or searching for moving. But it was only the people that were in the higher income groups that were able to actualize that and actually take steps towards moving, which tells us a lot about the effects and the possible limitations of the cash, that the effectiveness of the cash really depends on the starting point.
And we also saw that with employment and spending patterns. So for the lowest income groups, we really didn't see the type of changes in employment that we saw for those that perhaps had been able to meet their basic needs prior to receiving the transfer, and then it gave them more agency to make decisions about working less or changing jobs. And also when we look at spending patterns among the different income groups, the lowest income spent most of the transfer on meeting their basic needs, while those at a higher income level were able to have more decisions to spend on discretionary items, recreation, and things like that.
And this idea of agency is so important. We know that cash is an important tool that gives recipients agency. I mean, we saw that in our data on the effects of thinking about and planning for the future. We find a significant effect on having a budget, planning for large expenses, time spent on finances, planning to pursue future education. But we also know that participants' ability to actualize on that agency varies. And in many cases, more is needed.
So even though this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the findings that we have and what we are going to be sharing over the coming months, what is one of our takeaways? And I think the question, as we've wrapped up many years of work that I get most often is, does cash work? And my response is something like, well, does food work? Of course, we know that cash works and people can use it to meet their needs. But I think the bigger question is really understanding both the potential and the limitations. I think understanding the conditions under which cash has different effects, and if our goal is to promote economic inclusivity, understanding when it's not enough or what the limitations are as well is equally important in helping us design policies and supports that will promote economic inclusivity. And so for me, one of the goals of our research is both to understand the benefits and the limitations.
Thank you.
Thanks.